this is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Alright, so before I start this review, I want to introduce you guys to the concept of a yandere. Some people might not know what a yandere is, but it is imperative to understand this to understand the rest of this review. So a yandere is somebody who seems nice and sweet on the surface, but it becomes completely batshit insane when something pisses them off. And it's usually females, but it can be a boy as well. JoJo's Part 4 has one. So it starts off with Josuke coming back from visiting Hazamata in the hospital and catching up Okuyasu on what he learned while he was there. He visited Hazamata in the hospital mainly to get information on Red Hot Chili Pepper Stan User, but he had no such luck since Hazamata openly admits that they only ever talked over the phone. And sure enough, the fact that he's still alive confirms this, since Keiicho Nijimura was killed specifically because he had information on how to identify the Red Hot Chili Pepper Stan User. So if Hazamata had also known that information, he would have died. But the fact that he's not proves otherwise. So he doesn't really have any new information about Red Hot Chili Peppers, but he does have some information about Stans in general. So, according to Hazamata, Stan users are apparently drawn to each other, and the phenomenon isn't fully known. It's not fully explained why, but it's heavily implied that regardless of whether they're friend or foe, whoever they are, wherever they come from, all Stan users will eventually meet one another. It's basically inevitable, and it's why Red Hot Chili Pepper is specifically targeting Jotaro and Josuke, because he knows he's eventually going to have to face them, and he wants to get rid of them before that happens. So he's trying to prevent them from actually meeting one another, which means he's trying to play the long game. He's trying to get his two biggest threats out of the way without having to actually meet them, so that he can basically do whatever he wants unopposed. And it is a smart idea if that is indeed a rule about Stan users and how they have to meet each other regardless of where they came from, and the fact that they will eventually meet one another, then eventually we are going to see Red Hot Chili Pepper Stan User, and he is going to have to face Josuke and the group eventually. But for right now, he's just kind of waiting in the shadows, waiting to strike after they're gone. But his number will eventually be up, according to Josuke. As they're discussing this, they pass by a cafe and see Koichi sitting outside, and as they're about to go talk to him, they discover that he's actually there with a girl named Yukako Yamagishi, who meets with him under the pretense that he wants to talk to him about something. And Koichi doesn't initially pick up on what she wants to talk about, but it's implied that they do know each other, and sure enough, Josuke and Okuyasu decide to go and hide behind a tree until they can figure out the situation. And admittedly, Yukako admits that she has feelings for Koichi and asks if he returns the favor. And naturally, Koichi isn't entirely able to respond, and is trying to actually figure out his feelings and trying to figure out an appropriate response, because he's not entirely sure how to respond. But she's convinced that he hates her, which he doesn't. But then he's not entirely saying that he likes her either. But eventually, out of the blue, she finally snaps and demands that Koichi give her an answer immediately. But then immediately leaves after and says that he knows where to find her if he decides to actually admit things. And sure enough, walks off. And Koichi is notably a little bit unnerved, and it's even more unnerving when he discovers that there's actually hair in his cola now when there wasn't. And sure enough, Josuke sees and Okuyasu see this entire exchange. Okuyasu's initially jealous, but upon seeing Yukako's immediate outburst out of the blue, he thinks better of it and realizes that Yukako is probably a little bit nuts. But Josuke is just watching her with intrigue, remembering what Hazamata said about Stan users eventually meeting one another, and contemplates the fact that she may be a Stan user, it possibly. But sure enough, the next day at school, Koichi is cleaning up the chem lab, and Yukako meets with him in the chem lab and apologizes for her behavior the other day, pointing out that sometimes when she thinks too hard, she gets a little bit flustered and goes a little nuts. So and Koichi admits that it's okay and that they can still be friends, but then he immediately regrets that decision when she pulls out a sweater that's exactly his size and a meal for two. And he's not, and sure enough, it's implied that she's a little bit nuts. As I said, the whole definition of a yandere. As I said, they're sweet and loving on the outside, but they go a little bit nuts, specifically when their loved one, when the person of their affection is involved. So they're a little bit clingy, if you catch my drift. And sure enough, Koichi realizes he's in a bit of a bad situation because because she's trying to feed him now, and if he doesn't do does something wrong, she'll take it the wrong way and get mad at him. But if he does, it's basically like he's confessing his feelings for her, so he's not entirely sure what to do. Fortunately, one of his female classmates comes in and tells him to stop slacking off and take out the garbage, which he happily does by himself, might I add, and carries it all to the incinerator, with his classmate following behind. Yukako isn't entirely happy about this and confronts Koichi's classmate after he does this, pointing out that she doesn't want him seeing her anymore, and sure enough that that if she does meet with him again, she's going to regret it, and even uses the word homewrecker, which should tell you a kind of thing. She's already imagining Koichi and herself walking down the aisle being married. So she's a little bit nuts. Yeah, and sure enough, the classmate actually remarks back that she's not scared of her, and that she should really get better taste in men, which sets Yukako off, and reveals to the audience that she is in fact a stand user, and that her hair is actually a stand. It hasn't gotten a name yet, but her hair she can actually control her hair with her stand, and sure enough walks away, but uses her stand to pull the classmate into the incinerator so her head will catch on fire, and then blindfolding gags her so that she's unable to actually go find water. And sure enough, she's starting to burn alive, basically. But fortunately, Okuyasu and Josuke saw the whole thing, and Okuyasu uses his stand to cut away Yukako's hair, and basically sets the classmate free at the cost of her hairdo. And sure enough, as she's reeling, trying to figure out what the hell just happened, Okuyasu and Josuke in the background, might I add, they're not the main thing of this. They're not the main thing of this entire scene. They're just there talking their own stuff, and she's just kind of panicking internally. But as she's panicking internally, they discuss that Yukako is most likely a stand user, and they need to figure out how her stand works. But Josuke also points out that they don't really need to be in much of a hurry, since it doesn't seem like Yukako is an enemy at the very least, and most likely isn't going to hurt Koichi. But unfortunately, her presence is having other effects on Koichi. Namely, his grades are starting to slip because he's so worried about Yukako that he's not entirely sure what he's supposed to do. And sure enough, he goes to Josuke and Okuyasu for help, and they have a bit of a brainstorming session on how to actually get Yukako to leave him alone, pointing out that they need to find a way to make him less desirable somehow. And eventually they come up on the idea to just spread rumors about Koichi, particularly when Yukako is around them, to just get her to leave Koichi alone. And it backfires because it works, or at least the first half does. Okuyasu and Josuke start spreading rumors about Koichi that aren't actually true in front of Yukako, and Yukako is a little bit upset by this, but instead of thinking that these are actually lies and trying to see if the rumors about Koichi are true, instead decides to kidnap him and make him the ideal man that she wants. So, yeah, she decides that he's not going to live up to those rumors and actually nurture him to his full potential. So she breaks in while he's sleeping, kidnaps him, and then brings him back to her house. So, or at least her summer villa, as she explains later in the episode. And naturally, Koichi wakes up. And naturally, Koichi is a little bit panicked, and when he wakes up the next morning, he's a little confused and disoriented, and a little bit scared about the fact that he's in a house that isn't his own house. So, and then Yukako walks in to make him breakfast, but also points out that he's going to study while he eats. And as she's setting up his food, Koichi decides to take the opportunity to ask her about her hair and how it works. And she explains that she was actually shot by a bow and arrow by a guy that she doesn't know, though she's not entirely sure about all the details behind that. And when she woke up, she was able to manipulate her hair freely. And sure enough, Koichi immediately realizes that Keicho Nijimura is most likely involved, and also asks her if she knows anybody else who is able to do this. To which she responds that she does not. And Koichi is a little bit relieved by that, realizing that he still has an advantage in case she decides to hurt him. So, but sure enough, she set it up, and she actually set up a multiple choice thing. She has 3 little boxes, each one has a dish inside of them, and asks him to pick, and if he picks the right one, he gets actual food. And sure enough, she asks a multiple choice question. Koichi gets it right, and he's rewarded with food. But then she reveals what happens if he fails. She pulls out the other 2 boxes, revealing that they're not food. The one is I know for the first one is a bar of soap, and the other is a bunch of I forget what the other one is, but basically what happens is if he fails, he has to eat things that aren't really good for humans to eat. So, and sure enough, the reason she's doing this is to try and toughen him up and actually make him better at school, because she doesn't want the rumors about him to become true. And sure enough, sets up another set of rules. And this one actually has 3 answers that are more or less the same. So I forget the actual question, but all you need to know is that the question itself has 3 answers that are almost identical. And Koichi is a little bit concerned about what happened if he'll fail, since he knows he'll have to actually eat the things that aren't food if he fails. So he tries to figure it out, but since they're all very similar answers and he doesn't know off the top of his head, he decides to go by Yukako's mood. And Yukako picks up on this and makes him eat the other 2 things anyway. And of course he swats away and tries to escape, but then it reveals that she implanted some of her hair into his scalp, and then pins him to the ceiling to make a point. He's not getting away. And also explains that since it's her family's summer villa, nobody's going to find him until summer anyway, and then leaves, telling him that he needs to hurry up and finish his breakfast. So, yeah. Yukako Yamagishi. She's crazy. Just the long and short of it. That's the episode. She's crazy. But it is an interesting idea for a stand user fight, I guess. So Koichi has to find a way to defeat her, but not in the traditional sense. He just has to kind of, make sure. So they tried using words to try and trick her into leaving Koichi alone, and that failed. So it's entirely possible Koichi is going to have to figure out a strategy to actually get her to back down and not try to, make him into something he's not. Because it's very clear that Yukiko has built up this idea of Koichi in her head and is convinced that he will one day become a perfect ideal man, which isn't really what Koichi is. But she's clearly built up the idea that he's kind of this ideal person, and she wants to basically not only help him fulfill his full potential, but she also wants to be his girlfriend by any means necessary. So she's nuts. Yeah, that's just the long and short of it. Yukako Yamagishi is nuts. So yeah, basically, and there's a second part to this, I should mention. Which means we're going to have to put up with more of her being nuts. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to work out. I'm imagining Koichi is going to have to figure out a way to actually either outsmart her or convince her that she's she's a little bit crazy and needs to actually accept the fact that Koichi isn't perfect. I'm assuming it's going to be something similar to those lines, because Koichi's stand, the way it works, it's not going to be able to outmatch hers. And even then, she has the ability to manipulate hair, so that doesn't sound like it'll be too hard to deal with on its own. So Koichi is going to have to use the power of persuasion to actually deal with her, because it's Koichi, and he's not, because Koichi isn't really the kind of, because Koichi's stand hasn't developed to the point where he's ever actually able to deal with people in direct combat. He's mostly able to just use his stand to manipulate people's mindset and make them feel things. So yeah, he's not going to be able to fight them directly, and also Josuke and Oki also have no idea where he is, so they're not going to be much help either. So yeah, overall, this episode, she's crazy. That's just the long and short of this episode, really. So yeah, that's my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and on Twitter in the description below. And also, be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It really helps me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks on my way saying thanks. So be sure to check those out in the description below as well. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!